there are rabbis who have takes, who tell you what to think about when you're in their sermons, whether it's about who to vote for or what to think about regarding immigration or climate change, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that that has a space, or do you think that that is absolutely verboten from the pulpit?
I think that voting as a Jew is really complicated because on the one hand, my very particular interests might be different than the interests of the general population. And then I have to decide whether or not I'm voting for my specific thing. And I'm sure at some point we're going to talk about day school funding. But I remember growing up in Toronto, there were a lot of people in my family's community that were really gung-ho organizers on behalf of the Conservative Party, which had promised that they were going to fund day schools in Toronto. And that's nice, except that if the conservative politics don't align with your values, then you're voting in your own interest against potentially your liberal values for the other party. So do I vote in my own interest, or do I vote for what I think is good for everybody when those two are in tension? And I think it's really dangerous for Jews to vote in their own particular specific interest as a bloc. I appreciated, Avi, in your piece in the magazine, I think it was Rav Moshe Feinstein, who you quoted, who said Jews should vote, but didn't tell them how to vote, right? You go, you vote your values. And I think that the question of the particular and the general are real. And I think it's really dangerous for Jews to get into bed with one party or another.
Yeah, big Matthew, did you ever speak about politics when you give?
No, I've got a strict rule, a strict no politics rule. My class was training for our smicha, we started in the fall of 2016. So that was the push to Trump getting elected the first time. And my partner and I from Winnipeg were in a class with about half a dozen Americans. One of the things that we went through in our training was our weekly meetings. Everyone had to prepare a Devar Torah, a short Devar that had to be shared to build up that every week. And for a while, all of our American counterparts went very political. And we discussed, the merits of that position, and the room was very anti-Trump at the time. It's amazing to think what they would say now. But the collective wisdom is that, I think Yedida was kind of talking about this. I'm not in favor of sermons where rabbis get too caught up in their own in themselves, in their own perspective, right? This is a sermon that's supposed to hit the people you're speaking to. And politics, you are deliberately choosing an issue that is divided. You're not going to find any unity among a congregation of Jews between right wing and left wing when it comes to these sorts of things. Some people vote just on Israel. Some people vote just on one other issue. And you're willfully choosing a divisive topic that you're never going to bring the other side over with even a super powerful sermon. So to me, I stay away from things that are inherently divisive. I just don't see those as being very meaningful for the purpose of the sermon of trying to reach everybody. You're just going to infuriate the people who are on the other side. It was never my style.
I was shocked when I saw that the MK, which is the Montreal Kosher, the governing body that does kosher in Montreal, they're also the Jewish Community Council, which is the Haredi Beit Din, which does it does gets, and it does other sorts of various halachic, stuff for the city, and they do conversions. And they came out in strongly with a video message in favor of Pierre Poilievre. And so first of all, it was no big shocker, because for years they've been telegraphing that message, and that is really where the Haredi community is. And the other piece that hit me was oh, they're a private organization. You think that they're a nonprofit and they're sort of a public organization and they should not be able to make political statements, but they're not a charitable organization. They do whatever they want to do. So that was the first head scratcher. And then I was why are you alienating half the population, or more than half the population? You see the polls. There's less support for Pierre Poilievre than there was. And yes, they're trying to shore that up. But what if you're a person that wants to get a get, and this is the place to go in Montreal, and you're not very observant, and you're a liberal? Do you think that there are going to be people that are alienated, that are going to say, I just don't want to get these religious services with you, or I don't want to convert with you because you are supporting something that I really don't support? And they're willing to take that risk. And I was kind of shocked by that. But, that's their thing.
So one of the guests who I was talking to about this on Friday night was formerly in government, and he was avowedly, explicitly supportive. He's like, no, rabbis need to be moral voices. We are in a moment when rabbis need to take a position and speak up and be moral leaders in a totally overt, like this is where we are. Everything is terrible and the rabbis need to be leaders and stand up. And I'm very sympathetic to that position. And at the same time, I find myself a little bit like the figure in one of the Talmudic texts that Avi cited in his piece, Zechariah ben Avkulos, from the famous Talmudic story about Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. The people can go read the story in the magazine, or you'll do a voiceover or something. But like the important part about this figure, and this is why I feel myself identifying with him, is that like he can't make up his mind, right? He's like, oh, on the one hand, he's like Tevye, on the one hand this, and on the other hand that, and he wavers back and forth, and he can't decide, and then he ends up doing nothing and not taking a position, and Jerusalem burns as a result. And that's where the Talmud lands, right? Like his indecisiveness is the reason that the revolt starts. And so I don't have a good answer, but I find myself really hemming and hawing, and like we are in this moment. I mean, I think my political leanings are obvious, so I don't really need to hide them. But like, I'm glad I don't have a pulpit and I don't need to make a decision about this.
This is my answer to you when you say that, though, is that first of all, I had a teacher who once told me this, and it was specifically about halachic decisions. And he was like, there's no such thing as stringencies and leniencies. Every stringency is a leniency in the other direction, and every leniency is being stringent in the other direction back. And I think that is true when it comes to saying that something is moral or immoral, especially in today's society. I think that there are, for everything that one can go and say, this is the moral stance towards immigration, you have somebody else who believes that the moral stance in that situation is the exact opposite, because we have to protect our own country for whatever reason. I'm not taking sides in this debate for any reason, but we know that there are always people that are going to play the morality card on both sides. And not only that, but we see this within the Jewish community. There are always going to be people who will take any side and find a Jewish source for it. So you will always find somebody who will say that this is Jewish morality, right? That this is the Jewish moral stance to take. And I think that for that reason alone, I think that people can make their own personal decisions. I think that non-public, like if they're a public intellectual, and they happen to be a rabbi or they happen to be a Jewish thinker, go ahead and moralize all that you want. But if you're a pulpit rabbi that leads a community, you have a responsibility to take that step back and to sort of say, I'm not here to tell you that Judaism says this, because Judaism says a lot of things and puts it in a lot of different ways for a lot of people. Matthew, I see you nodding.
But
go ahead.
What you've said is that like, obviously, yes, we've established, and we're here in this room, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 3 rabbis in various different stripes, 700 opinions, fine. But the Torah does have positions. Judaism does have positions, right? So like there's wavering and there's gradations, but the Torah is a political document, and it does tell us, and the rabbis interpret in lots of different ways how we should live our lives and what our values should be. And I grant that it's not always very black and white, but some stuff is more black and white than gray. Right? Like, I don't think that you can find that the rabbis are okay with, pick some crazy example.
Look, my opinion will always go back to the first thing. I can't even really fake it. Like, I understand that there's this sort of idea, particularly now, that you're trying to, that the Canadians are very conscious of Canada's stance as a country against Israel within this war. And then it would fight, that it would determine a lot of people's kind of positions on who to vote for. I think that would be maybe the most pressing issue. Just to give you an example of how, just like kind of like, to me, in my town, in 2 of the neighborhoods in Winnipeg that have the largest concentration of Jewish community members, the incumbent in both ridings, which are geographically next door to each other, are both Jews and both from the opposite parties. One's an MP for the Conservatives and one's an MP for the Liberals. They're both Jewish people from basically the same congregation, like the same community. Like, to me, that tells you everything. Like, you're going to get them in the same congregation, you get a rabbi up there saying vote Liberal or vote Conservative. It's like, it's crazy. Like, you know that that's not going to work. So I don't know why you would even try.
Yeah, you look at Montreal, it's the same thing, right? You have Anthony Housefather, who has been long a champion of the Jewish community in Montreal, in the Mount Royal riding, and people are really mad at him, not because he's become an anti-Semite, but because they feel that the Liberal Party has become not pro-Israel enough, and therefore they have turned their backs on him, even though he is the one that is saying that I disagree with everything that they're saying vis-a-vis Israel. And then you have somebody who's coming up against him, Neil Oberman, who, and this is one of the elections that people are going to be watching, Monday night when the polls come in. He is the guy that was leading some of these lawsuits against McGill, against Concordia, representing some of these students. And he's saying that, just because this guy is not denouncing the Liberal Party enough, I'm going to go against him. And they have, like you said, who's to say that they are more Jewish or less Jewish than the other?
Right.
So-
I mean, it's dangerous. It's just dangerous to